I hated the gatherings at the Oak Ridge Country Club. It seemed like they found a new reason every few weeks to throw another fancy event where all the wealthy folks could show off and boost their egos. My wife, Karen, however, loved these get-togethers and always seemed to look forward to them. Sadly, over the past year or so, Karen had started drinking too much at these parties and sometimes ended up embarrassing herself, and by extension, me. Karen and I had been married for 24 years, and we had 3 kids in college. I met her while getting my MBA, and things clicked right away. But about a decade ago, things between us started to cool down. I figured it was just the natural course of marriage. I wished for more affection and intimacy, but I was too hesitant to bring it up, afraid it might make things worse. So I accepted that this was how it would be, less romantic than I'd imagined. Despite that, I had a good job that paid well, enough to support our family, especially with 3 kids in school. Karen didn't work and didn't have any interest in doing so. She preferred spending her time on community projects and social events. My income was what kept her lifestyle afloat. Even though she was in her 40s, Karen still looked great, probably due to her regular spa visits. I, on the other hand, was just average. Some gray hair and a bit of a belly. My job required me to dress sharply, which my wife loved, since she had a thing for shopping. Although I was good at what I did, I wasn't truly happy. I wanted a change, something that would bring me joy without the constant worry about money. I also wanted to move somewhere smaller. Our house was too big for just the 2 of us now, and I disliked the costs and work that went into maintaining it. But Karen didn't even want to talk about downsizing. She was set on keeping her big house, her country club membership, and her wealthy social circle. At one of the more recent parties, I wandered around, making small talk here and there. Karen was drinking more than usual, and it was beginning to show. Off in one corner, a group of women were chatting about personal topics, which I quickly avoided. Just as I was about to leave the room, I overheard Karen talking loudly. She mentioned a man named Scott Johnson and said he'd given her some of the most enjoyable experiences in bed. The whole room went quiet. A few of the women noticed me standing nearby. Karen, realizing I'd heard her, tried to laugh it off, but the damage was done. She grinned at me, but I could tell she wasn't fully aware of what she just said. I quietly set down my glass and left the room, walking out of the club without a word. Instead of heading home, I drove straight to the airport and caught the next flight to Denver. I'd always liked Denver's peaceful vibe compared to larger cities like Vegas. The fresh air and open spaces helped me clear my mind and think about what was going on with Karen. I spent the weekend in Denver, turning off my phone and booking a room at a small hotel. I wasn't much of a gambler, but I liked the calm the city offered. On Saturday, I grabbed a burger and fries and reflected on my situation. Denver felt right. The cool climate and the peaceful surroundings seemed like a much-needed escape. Later, as I walked around, I passed a real estate office. A condo in the window display caught my eye. It was small and perfect for one person. Suddenly, the idea of getting a place here felt like a real possibility. After a couple of hours with an agent, I found a small, furnished unit I liked. The only catch was that I couldn't purchase it while still married. Fortunately, I was able to arrange a discreet lease-to-own deal by offering a large deposit, which thrilled the seller. One of the best decisions I made early in our marriage was taking control of our finances. Karen was never great with numbers, so she was fine with me handling the bills, as long as she could spend the money. That night, I treated myself to sushi at a nice restaurant. It felt good to enjoy the evening on my own terms. The next morning, I had breakfast at a cafe, eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed my waitress had a bruise on her face, half hidden by her hair. She seemed new to the job, a little too eager to make sure everything was perfect. Her name tag said Sarah, but when I asked, she explained her real name was Selma. Sarah was just easier for people to pronounce. I offered to leave a good tip if she'd tell me the story behind her black eye, but she politely declined, suggesting I leave a smaller one instead. I agreed, realizing it was rude of me to pry. Since I already had the key to the condo, I decided to grab some essentials to make it feel more like home. My first stop was at the Midtown Motors used car lot just down the street, where I bought a Ford Focus with high mileage. It wasn't the best for long trips, but it would do just fine for getting around town. I had considered renting a car, but since I planned to be back regularly, buying seemed like a smarter option. I managed to pick up everything I needed to get comfortable, spending just a couple $100s, including some extra clothes. The rest of the day was spent setting up accounts at a few of the local casinos. I wrote checks to each one, and the funds were deposited into my accounts without leaving much of a trail. By the end of the day, I had deposited $60,000 across 4 different casinos. I also picked up a small spiral notebook to keep track of my gambling activities, logging amounts, dates, and casino names, so I had a chronological record of my losses. Though, in reality, I hadn't lost any money yet. No one would question my notes, given my reputation as someone who wasn't very good at poker. I had 6 months to come up with the down payment for the condo, which seemed manageable. By dinner, I was starving, having forgotten to eat lunch. I headed back to the same diner and was served by Sarah again, who was working a double shift. She explained it was because rent in the area was so high. This time, I didn't ask any questions and simply ordered my meal, trying to be polite. As I finished eating, Sarah approached and apologized for being a bit short with me earlier. I accepted her apology, trying to be gracious. "Adjusting to all of this has been tough," she said, gesturing toward her eye. This little gift came from my soon-to-be ex-husband when I told him about the divorce. "Hopefully, this will be the last one. Oh, and thanks for the big tip at breakfast. It really helps." She smiled as she walked away, but I could see the sadness behind it. She stayed on my mind for the rest of the evening. I realized there wasn't much I could do for her right now, so I figured it was time to head back home to deal with some things before making any more plans here. Getting a flight back wasn't difficult, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I arrived. The next morning, I saw Sarah working again and managed to catch her at one of her tables. After I ate, I went over to talk to her. "I've got a bit of a problem, and I was wondering if you could help me out," I said. "I need someone to house sit for me. I've got to leave town today and won't be back for at least a week or so. It's a 2-bedroom condo, so there's plenty of space. Would you be interested? It'll be for a couple of months at least." "Are you serious?" she asked, a little skeptical. "No strings attached?" "None at all. I hate to leave the place empty," I assured her. 90% of the time, you'll be alone, and when I'm there, I'll stay out of your way. Promise." I didn't actually care too much if anything happened to the place, but I wasn't going to let her know that. "Okay, but is it close enough to walk from the diner?" she asked. "Pretty close, but I'll leave you my car, too. It's parked at the condo, a blue Ford Focus. Just make sure there's gas in it when I get back. I'll give you a call before I return, and you can leave a message on the condo phone if you need anything." Sarah seemed hesitant, unsure if this was some kind of setup. I didn't have time to convince her, so I handed her the condo and car keys, along with a napkin on which I scribbled the address. "If you're not comfortable with it, that's fine," I said. "Just don't go. I'll pick up the keys next Friday when I get back." She took the keys and the napkin but still looked unsure. "Don't worry about it, Sarah. If it works, great. If not, no problem." An hour later, I was on my flight back home. I would have preferred to stay in Denver, but there were some things I needed to take care of. After picking up my car from long-term parking, I stopped by the house. Karen's car wasn't there, so I packed up some essentials for the week: clothes, shoes, my laptop, passport, and birth certificate. I was lucky the company had a kitchenette unit available, so I reserved it for the next 2 weeks. After charging my laptop, I called my eldest son, John. I explained that his mother and I were having some issues and that I'd be busy for a while. I told him to reassure his sisters, who were both at Auburn, not to worry. We could afford their tuition, thanks to the finances being under control. After the call, I plugged in my phone and went for a shower. The only food I'd had on the flight was a tiny bag of pretzels, so I was looking forward to a real meal. Monday turned out to be busy. First thing, I went to the bank and arranged for a sizable second mortgage on the house, one that exceeded its current value. I knew things would change by the end of the month. I also made arrangements for my kids' tuition directly with Auburn University through the bank, sending $240,000 to cover their prepaid fees. With a cashier's check of just over $200,000 in hand, I took care of a few financial matters, including cashing in a couple of CDs and closing out a money market account. I decided to hold off on dealing with the credit cards until later in the month. Running late for work, I arrived to find my secretary, Emily, waiting with a cup of black coffee and a grin. "Good morning, Mr. Terrell," she greeted me. "I heard about the country club incident on Friday. What's the plan?" "Yes, it's all true," I admitted. "I need you to gather all the information you can on Todd Mitchell, and please reschedule my appointments." Quietly, Emily nodded in understanding, giving me a thumbs up as she left the office. I had originally thought it would take weeks to sort everything out, but now, things seem to be moving quickly. I called my lawyer to schedule an immediate appointment, and as I left, I made it clear to Emily that I wouldn't be taking any calls from my wife. I also instructed her to make sure Karen wasn't allowed into the building, no exceptions. Jerry Proctor, a friend from college, was my divorce lawyer of choice. He had never liked Karen, so I figured he'd be perfect for the job. "I was at the country club on Friday, Robert," Jerry said when I called, "so I have an idea why you were there." "You're spot on, Jerry," I replied. "Not trying to be smart, but I should have listened to you a long time ago. I figured I could deal with everything, as long as I wasn't humiliated in public. That changed on Friday. Now, I need access to all my accounts and a couple of powers of attorney. Can you get that done?" "My assistant will prepare everything and give you a call," Jerry confirmed. "Is there anything else I should know?" "Well, Jerry," I admitted with a sigh, "the events of Friday triggered something in me. I've developed a bit of a gambling problem. I spent the weekend in Tucson and lost a significant amount of money. I'm going back next weekend, and I'm worried it's going to get worse." "That's bad, buddy. Are you keeping track of your losses?" "I am," I said, "and I'll continue to do so. I might send you copies of everything just in case." "Good idea, Robert. I don't think we need to discuss this further for now." "Agreed. Anything else I should do?" "No, you're good. Handle your business and take care of yourself. Fill out this financial worksheet and bring it when you come in tomorrow to sign those forms. I've got your back." As I hung up the phone, I realized I'd missed lunch. Emily had already prepared a file for me with information on Todd Mitchell and suggested I speak with Wilma Grimm in HR before doing anything else. Wilma had been with the company for years. She was known for being incredibly efficient, always dressed professionally, with her hair neatly in a bun. She could be a bit intimidating. If Emily wanted me to see her, it must have been important. "Good afternoon, Mr. Terrell. Please have a seat," Wilma said when I arrived at her office. She was trying to ease my nerves, but I still felt a bit unsettled, like a kid called into the principal's office. Despite my position, I was in awe of her. After she closed the door, Wilma got straight to the point. "I don't engage in office gossip, Mr. Terrell, but I deal in facts," she began, her voice firm. "Todd Mitchell came to me about 3 years ago and confided something in me, which I promised to keep confidential. But given the current situation, I feel I have no choice but to share it." She paused, giving me a serious look. "If anything I say makes you uncomfortable, feel free to walk out, and this conversation will end. Don't direct your anger at me. I'm only stating the facts. Do you understand?" I nodded. "I can handle it," I said, trying to keep things light, though I could tell Wilma didn't appreciate my attempt at humor. "About 3.5 years ago, your wife, Karen, approached Todd Mitchell at a company event," Wilma continued. "There was heavy drinking, and they ended up having an inappropriate encounter in one of the offices. Todd was engaged at the time, but Karen threatened to expose their affair unless he continued seeing her. She looked down briefly before continuing. Todd thought things would stop after his wedding, but Karen didn't let up. She pressured him into continuing the relationship for several months, threatening to reveal everything if he refused. Eventually, Todd couldn't handle it anymore and confided in me. I couldn't ethically disclose it to anyone, so we quietly transferred Todd to another office. Once he moved to Dallas, Karen backed off, and Todd never told his wife. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb everything. "Any questions?" Wilma asked. It was clear to me now that Todd Mitchell had been just as much a victim in this situation as I was. I had considered retaliating, but it felt pointless after hearing the full story. "Any advice, Miss Grimm?" "Now that you know the full story, you have the upper hand," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I suggest you let it go. Todd Mitchell is a valuable employee, and it wouldn't be fair to punish him for your wife's actions." "Thank you for your time," I said, appreciating her honesty. I think you're right. Being coerced into intimacy with my wife is punishment enough, I said as we stood up. Wilma smiled. By the way, it's not miss. I've been married for 32 years. It was hard to imagine Wilma Grimm as a married woman, but I supposed when she let her guard down, she could be a completely different person. My mind briefly wandered to some bizarre images, and I quickly changed the subject. I had more pressing matters than Wilma's personal life. Emily had rescheduled all my appointments, giving me a clean slate. Despite her efforts to explain my absence, Karen had called 3 times, refusing to believe I was in Baltimore. Emily had also set up meetings with the company president the next day and with the legal department that afternoon. Later, I invited Emily to dinner, but she laughed and said her husband wouldn't approve. She joked that maybe I should ask Wilma instead. My time with the legal team ran longer than expected, so I had to compensate a few staff members for overtime. Thankfully, they were all understanding. The process turned out to be more complicated than I'd imagined. Securing a cash settlement for my retirement plan was tricky. Closing the 401k and shared savings accounts went smoothly but took a while. Cashing in my sick time, vacation time, and company insurance was relatively easy by comparison. By the end of the meeting, it was clear I was on my way out of the company. I just hoped the news wouldn't reach Karen before I was ready. I had dinner alone that night, and oddly enough, my thoughts wandered to Sarah. I wondered if she had moved into the condo, and if she was still working double shifts. I barely knew her, but I felt a pull to go back to Reno and see her. It felt juvenile, and I tried to push the thought aside. It was foolish to fantasize about something that would never happen. The following morning, I cashed in 2 whole life insurance policies and canceled 2 term policies. I was surprised by how much cash value the whole life policies had built up. I could collect the checks the next morning. I also canceled the insurance on Karen's Lexus, which was leased in her name but insured under mine. Before heading to work, I stopped by Jerry's office to drop off the financial form and sign the papers his secretary had prepared. When I returned to the office, Emily had a fresh cup of coffee waiting for me. "Boss," she began, "I don't mean to add more to your plate, but you should talk to Calvin Bostic in settlements before your meeting with Richard Ryder. The president probably already knows what you're going to discuss." The settlements department was tucked away in the basement. No sunlight, just fluorescent lighting, like a dungeon. "Calvin," I greeted him as I walked in. "Emily said you needed to talk to me." Calvin Bostic was a quiet, efficient guy who got things done without drawing attention to himself. He led me to a private corner and shared some disturbing news. "About 6 years ago, a guy named Raymond Upright worked here," Calvin explained. "He was married with kids, but got involved with your wife after an office party. He tried to end things, but Karen wouldn't let him. She kept calling him at home and at work, threatening to expose the affair if he didn't keep seeing her. He finally called her bluff, but his wife found out anyway and kicked him out. His life fell apart after that. I don't know where he is now, but rumor has it your wife paid his wife $10,000 to keep quiet about the affair. I can't confirm that part, though." "Thanks, Cal," I replied, feeling deflated. "Anyone else got any more good news for me?" "I didn't mean to upset you, Mr. Terrell," Calvin said. "Emily just thought you should know. You did the right thing. I appreciate it." Afterward, I headed straight to the 9th floor for my meeting with Mr. Ryder. I arrived early, but he saw me right away. Our conversation was short and to the point. Legal and payroll would handle everything for me, and once it was settled, I was to call him personally from wherever I was. He handed me a card with his private cell number on the back. There were no promises, no regrets, just business. It felt like everything was resolved on one level, but on another, things were still very much open-ended. I simply nodded and left without saying a word. Emily greeted me with a smile when I got back to the office, handing me my usual coffee. "Book me a flight to Reno for Thursday morning with a 2-hour layover in Dallas," I said. She pointed toward the window. "You might want to check this out. Karen's in the parking lot arguing with security. She's been there for over 20 minutes. They won't let her in, and she refuses to leave. What do you want to do, boss?" "It looks like the guards have things under control," I said. "My only concern right now is finding someone to have dinner with. I hate eating alone." I called Jerry to check on things, but he told me he couldn't do anything until I demonstrated that I didn't have any money. The truth was, I was still quite well off. Between the checks I had and the cash sitting in my accounts, I wasn't exactly broke. I reassured him I'd head to Reno early and wouldn't come back until I was completely broke. Occasionally, someone would poke their head into my office to tell me Karen was still trying to reach me. She had all her friends calling their husbands at work to track me down. I stayed a bit longer, tidying up the office to make things easier for my replacement. When I finally went to leave, Karen was sitting on the hood of my car, waiting for me. Emily grinned and handed me the keys to her Honda Civic. "This is the perfect excuse for my husband to come pick me up and take me to dinner," she said with a wink. "By the way, you're not planning anything reckless in Dallas, are you?" "No," I replied. "Just wrapping up some loose ends. No revenge." "I promise," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Dinner was a quick affair at an Outback Steakhouse in Allentown, and I made it back to my apartment just before midnight. The next morning was a whirlwind. I signed off on more documents with Jerry, closed out all the bank accounts, and cut up the credit cards. I also arranged for the utilities at the house to be shut off the following week. Checks were rolling in, from the bank, the insurance company, and work. I didn't realize I had this much value sitting around. I picked up a new cell phone and canceled the shared one Karen and I used to have. Even my country club membership was gone. I sold it to an old buddy for $23,000. My last stop was at the office, where my replacement had already moved in. He was a sharp guy, flown in from Boston on short notice. He seemed excited about the opportunity. Emily was handling things so well that I didn't need to show him much. He was in good hands. There were still a few things back at the house I wished I had taken, but none of it was important enough to bother going back for. Emily, ever generous, insisted I keep her car for now, and her husband would swing by the airport to collect it later. I picked up a couple of cheap suitcases to pack up what little I had left in the apartment. Whatever I forgot, I could easily replace once I got settled in Reno. Suddenly, it hit me. I had tied up all the loose ends. My assets were now in liquid form, cash in hand, no stocks or investments to worry about, except for the house, which I was signing over to Karen. When I called the airline, they managed to get me on an earlier flight without any hassle. I rang up Jerry to give him the update. "Hey, just wanted to let you know, I'm flying out tonight. You got everything you need?" "Yep, I'm good, Bob," he replied. "I'll serve the papers tomorrow, but I'll still need that financial paperwork soon." "Go ahead and give the papers to her," I said. "I'll send the proof of financial irresponsibility as soon as possible. Just be careful, Bob. I don't want either of us caught in a bad situation here. Karen might hire a high-powered lawyer from Philly, but that could backfire on her. It's in your hands, Jerry. Just look out for me, and try not to charge too much. I'll be a poor man soon enough. Oh, and see if you can locate a guy named Raymond Upright. I think he might need some help, and I could be the one to offer it. Will do, Bobby. Safe travels, and keep me posted." I left a voicemail at the condo, letting Sarah know I'd be arriving later that night. I didn't want her startled if she heard someone come in, so I made sure to say I'd call first. At this point, I had no idea if she was even staying at the place, but I hoped she was. It was strange. I barely knew her, yet I found myself wishing for some kind of connection, even if it was just friendship. I had to be careful not to push anything. She was in a vulnerable spot, and I didn't want her to think I was taking advantage. The flight to Dallas was uneventful, and I landed early enough to enjoy a leisurely breakfast. I'd set up a quick meeting with Todd Mitchell. When he walked into his office and saw me sitting there, I could tell he wasn't thrilled. "Mr. Terrell," he said, "I'd like to say it's good to see you, but I'd be lying." "Relax, Todd," I replied, trying to keep things casual. "I'm not here to make things difficult. I just wanted to let you know I understand what you were going through back then. No hard feelings." "You could have called," he said, still guarded. "True," I admitted. "But I was in town, and I thought it was worth a quick face-to-face. I wanted to clear the air." Todd shook his head in disbelief. "I don't understand why you're doing this. I'm the one who messed up. You don't owe me anything. I should be apologizing to you." "You made mistakes, sure," I said, "but let's be honest. Karen was the driving force behind all of this. Her actions made things tough for both of us. You're not blameless, but I don't think it's fair for you to carry all the guilt. I don't want you stuck in that place." He looked genuinely relieved. That's very kind of you to say. I don't even know how to respond or how to make it up to you. I slid one of Jerry's business cards across his desk. Give my lawyer a call. He might need a small favor from you. Nothing too big. At most, he may ask for a notarized statement to confirm what happened. I can promise you, it won't come back to haunt you or your wife. Todd and I shook hands. It was a little awkward given the situation, but it felt like the right thing to do. Todd Mitchell didn't deserve to have his life fall apart over a few mistakes, even if they had happened more than once. A couple of hours later, I boarded my flight to Reno, thinking about where things had gone wrong. I'd worked my whole life to provide for my family, making sure Karen and the kids had everything they needed. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what mattered to my marriage. When things fall apart like this, it's easy to look inward and take the blame. I'd done that for a long time, and part of me still felt responsible. But Karen's actions went beyond that. She crossed a line when she publicly humiliated me. I could have forgiven everything else if she just kept things quiet. But she didn't, and I wasn't going to let her off the hook for that. When I arrived at Reno Tahoe International Airport, I was surprised to see Sarah waiting for me at baggage claim. She wasn't dressed in her usual work uniform. She looked relaxed, casual, like someone who had finally found a moment to breathe. I didn't expect you to pick me up, I said, genuinely surprised. I just wanted to let you know I'd be arriving tonight. Good evening, Robert, Sarah greeted me with a smile. I figured since I've been using your car, it was the least I could do. You're not working tonight? I asked, noticing how relaxed she seemed. Nope, I've cut back a bit thanks to your offer. That wasn't me being generous, I replied, half joking. I just wanted a way to spend some time with you. And what exactly do you plan to do once you have me all to yourself? She teased, her face flushing slightly. I realized then I should stop before I said something that might push her away. The fact that she was teasing me was a good sign, but I didn't want to overstep. 30 minutes later, we arrived at her apartment, which had been spruced up since the last time I saw it. The place looked cozy with a few new touches that made a big difference in the overall vibe. To show my appreciation for picking me up at the airport and her efforts with the apartment, I took her out for a nice dinner. We indulged in prime rib, though Sarah seemed to enjoy the wine more than the meal. So, how's the divorce coming along? I asked, curious about her situation. Terribly, she sighed. I've still got about 3 weeks before I can even file for it. You need 6 weeks of residency here, right? I reminded her. She poked at her food before answering, yeah, but honestly, leaving Tony was more urgent than the divorce. It's just a piece of paper. I guess I used the divorce as an excuse to get away. Her words hit home. At first, divorcing Karen felt critical to me too, but now I wasn't sure anymore. What I really wanted was to stop her from benefiting from the marriage. Remarrying was never in my plans, so maybe the whole thing wasn't worth the hassle after all. We spent the rest of the evening talking about lighter subjects, movies, hobbies, and books. I noticed Sarah didn't have any kids, but I didn't push the topic. That night, we both retreated to our separate rooms. By the time I woke up the next morning, Sarah had already left for work, but she'd made sure to leave fresh coffee waiting for me, which was all I needed after the heavy meal the night before. After a quick shower, I called Jerry to check in. Jerry, how's it looking? I asked. There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. Not great, Robert. I've got some bad news. What happened? I've only been gone a day, I exclaimed, my chest tightening. Karen's been stirring the pot, Jerry explained. She found out about the bank accounts, and it's worse than that. She got a restraining order against you. All your accounts are frozen, even if they're empty. You can't go near her, the house, or even contact your adult kids. It's a mess, and it's going to take a lot of time and money to sort this out. I felt my stomach drop. Jerry, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm done, I said, overwhelmed. So, no more handling the divorce? He asked, sounding concerned. That's right, I confirmed, feeling defeated. To make matters worse, she's hired a private investigator to track you down. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I wonder how she's paying for all this? I don't know and I don't care. Just be careful, Robert. If the police or anyone else come knocking, I'll have to cooperate. I can't risk my career, even for you. I get it, Jerry. Do what you need to do. I'll handle things on my end. Thanks for your help. With that, I hung up, my mind racing. The best laid plans can crumble in a moment, and I realized that I didn't have a backup plan. My idea to pretend I'd lost all my money at the casinos was no longer feasible. The only bright spot in all of this was Sarah leaving her car for me. I wasn't sure how she had gotten to work, but at least I had a way to get around. With no clear path forward, I spent the morning visiting 6 different casinos, cashing out checks and converting them into chips or credit. I didn't want to risk going through the banks in case Karen had locked everything down. The casinos were more than happy to accommodate me, and by midday, I had a sizable stash of cash and chips. After a quick lunch, I began withdrawing the money. Within 2 hours, I had turned all the chips into cash and closed out the casino accounts. I now had a large bag of money and no more reason to worry about being traced. Feeling somewhat secure, I drove out to Carson City, where I rented a safe deposit box at a small bank and stashed away everything but $5,000 for immediate expenses. For the first time in days, I felt a little relieved, knowing everything was safely stored. Eager to see Sarah again, I headed back to the condo, thinking we could have another relaxing dinner together. But the moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The place felt off, and Sarah was frantically trying to fix things that didn't seem broken in the first place. When she turned to look at me, she quickly tried to cover part of her face. "I'm sorry, Robert," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how he found me. I didn't realize Tony was following me until I got inside. I should have been more careful." Slowly, I took her hand away from her face, revealing a swollen lip and a large bruise covering the right side of her cheek. My blood ran cold. "Was it Tony?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded. "He brought his brothers with him. They're out looking for you now. Tony told me not to leave the condo." I gave Tony and his goons the names of 3 casinos. "They have no idea what you look like, so they're running around blind," Sarah explained. "They're not exactly the brightest." It was clear what we had to do. Staying was too risky, and calling the cops wasn't an option either. We left everything behind, drove west, and checked into a tiny roadside motel in Grass Valley. The room had only 1 bed, but I made sure to keep things respectful. I grabbed some takeout for us and a bit of makeup to help Sarah cover the bruises. She tried her best, but it was hard to hide the damage Tony had done. She apologized over and over that night, and I felt relieved when she finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, we headed to Sacramento to pick up some clothes and personal supplies. I'd reserved the motel in Grass Valley for 2 more nights, buying us a little more time. Over the next few days, Sarah and I spent time just talking, getting to know each other better. There was no pressure, no flirtation, just 2 people with troubled pasts trying to figure out what came next. It struck me how much more at ease I felt with Sarah than I ever had with Karen, even after 24 years of marriage. When we weren't chatting, my mind was consumed with worry. I knew going back to the condo wasn't an option, not for either of us. Tony could track her down, and with everything going on, it wasn't safe for me either. I'd left behind some important things, my laptop, passport, and a few documents, but in hindsight, it all seemed trivial now. Despite having known Sarah for only a few days, I found myself trusting her in a way that surprised me. We were both trying to escape the messes our spouses had made. "Have you ever been to Mexico?" she asked me one evening, out of the blue. "No, can't say I have," I replied. "Why, are we planning a trip?" "I don't know," she said thoughtfully, "but if things go bad, maybe we should." I wasn't sure what to say. "It's an idea," I admitted, "but if things do go south, there's something I need you to do for me." She looked confused. "What are you talking about?" "Robert, you don't owe me anything. You've done more than enough." "Just listen," I said, feeling a sense of urgency. "I've stashed a lot of money away. It's all legal, but I'm keeping it hidden from Karen. If anything happens to me, I need you to retrieve it." Her brow furrowed. "Who's after you? You haven't really told me what's going on. Did you do something illegal?" I sighed, realizing how deep the situation had become. "Several federal agencies are after me, along with a private investigator, and maybe the local police will get involved too if Karen pushes hard enough. All I'm trying to do is protect some money so she can't take it." Sarah seemed to process this for a moment before asking, What do you want me to do with the money if something happens? If things go bad, I need you to take the money, head to Guadalajara, and wait for me there. Use whatever you need to get by until I can find you. And how exactly are you going to find me? She asked, skeptical. Go to La Badad Market every morning for coffee. It's a big place, but I'll find you. Sarah looked at me, concerned. Why not just go now, Robert? Why wait? I'd rather we go together when the time's right, I said, avoiding her eyes. I feel better when we're together. She wanted to press the point, but I brushed it off, not wanting to linger on the topic. 2 hours later, we crossed the mountains and arrived in Carson City. I added Sarah's name to the safety deposit box access and gave her her own key. When we got back to the condo, I parked a little farther away than usual, wanting to be cautious. The complex had an underground parking garage, open but covered, giving just enough space for a quiet approach. I asked Sarah to stay in the car while I went ahead to check things out. What kind of problem are you expecting? She asked, eyes wide with concern. I don't know, I admitted. But after everything, anything's possible. As I made my way through the parking area, something caught my eye. A small, wiry man in a long leather coat was standing by one of the support columns, holding something large and dark in his hand. His strange grin told me he knew who I was. Robert Terrell, right? He asked with an almost proud smile. Your wife sent me. Okay, what do you want? I asked, keeping my voice calm. I need your wedding ring and your wallet. I get the ring, but why the wallet? I need this to look like a robbery. Make what look like a robbery? I asked, already knowing the answer. Your wife hired me to end you, Mr. Terrell, he said, his smile never fading. You better hope she paid you up front, I replied, because she's out of cash. Before he could respond, I noticed 3 men approaching from the far side of the parking lot. They were dressed in long leather coats, looking like they meant business. One of them shouted, Terrell, we need to have a little chat. It was Tony, and his brothers were flanking him. The hitman, startled by the sudden intrusion, turned to face them. As he did, one of the men noticed the weapon in his hand, and all 3 reached for their guns. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I dove across the concrete barrier and sprinted toward the car. Gunshots echoed through the garage as I ran, the sounds bouncing off the walls. When I glanced up, I saw Sarah speeding down the street, the car already gone. Across the road, 2 men in suits were exiting a black SUV. They looked like federal agents, likely watching the place for me. The gunfight must have distracted them because I managed to slip away unnoticed. Sarah and the car were long gone, and there was no way I was going back to the condo. I didn't care who shot who in that garage. All I knew was that multiple groups were now after me, and I had no intention of sticking around to find out what happened next. I had a few options left. I could head to Carson City to retrieve my money, but that idea seemed too risky with everything going on. Trouble was closing in fast from all directions. My plan had been simple, escape a failing marriage, but now it felt like I was running from far more than just a cheating wife. How did it all spiral so far out of control? I needed things to cool down. With the cash I had on hand, just over $4,000, I needed a place to hide out for a while. The money would last me, but not forever. Why Karen had tried to have me killed was still a mystery. Did she really think there was life insurance left to collect? I thought she was smarter than that. Clearly, I'd misjudged her. I hopped on a bus to San Francisco. A few $1,000s doesn't stretch far in the Bay Area, and the first 1,000 went fast. New ID, a fake social security number, and a few other necessities. At least now I could get a job. I found a dingy room with a shared bathroom and managed to land a gig waiting tables at a quiet little restaurant. After a month, I was making enough to get by and even earned regulars who requested me as their waiter. Of course, my cell phone service had been cut off. I hadn't paid the bill since I fled Reno. It didn't cost much to get a prepaid phone with limited minutes, but I hesitated to use it. I wanted to call Sarah, but I had no idea where she was or how to reach her. Instead, I decided to check in with Jerry. Hey, buddy, it's Robert. Figured I'd get an update on things. Bobby. Jerry sounded surprised. Good to hear from you. Things are still messy, but not as bad as you might think. Where are we at with all this? Am I still on the most wanted list? Well, most of that's cleared up, especially after Karen got arrested. But the IRS is still poking around about your 401k. Other than that, you're in the clear. What? Karen's been arrested? How did that happen? You didn't know? Ever hear of a guy named Lester Lowe? The name hit me like a truck. Yeah, I met him briefly about 3 months ago. He was the one hired to take me out. But, plans changed when a few other goons showed up. I slipped away during their argument. How's he involved? Turns out Karen hired Lowe to kill you, Jerry explained. After Lowe got roughed up in Reno, he spilled everything to the cops, said Karen stiffed him on the payment. He sold her out to save his own skin. Cops bought it, arrested her, and now she's sitting in jail, waiting for trial. I chuckled bitterly. I'd feel bad for her if she hadn't tried to have me killed. I assume her parents are trying to bail her out? They tried, but the judge denied bail. You want me to restart the divorce proceedings? We've got more than enough grounds this time. Yeah, go ahead, I said. It'd be nice to finalize that, but I don't care as much anymore. I just want to get clear of her. Oh, and another thing. Your kids came home when Karen got arrested. They were worried at first, but once the truth came out, they calmed down. They want you to call them. Let them know you're okay. I'll get in touch with them soon, I promised, feeling a pang of guilt. So how's the money situation? Did your plan to stash it away work out? Not exactly, I sighed. Lost track of things, lost contact. I'll check on it next week, but at this point, who knows? Sometimes even the best-laid plans fall apart, Jerry said sympathetically. Tell me about it. Oh, one last thing, Jerry. Did Karen ever explain why she wanted me dead? Not that I know of. I thought it might have been for the insurance, but she didn't even know you'd canceled it. We ended the call, and I immediately checked in with the kids. They were relieved to hear from me and asked a lot of questions about the situation with Karen. I avoided most of it. There were things I wasn't ready to tell them yet. Some things they didn't need to know. I decided to drive up to Carson City to check on the safety deposit box. Borrowing a car, I made the trip, but when I opened the box, it was empty. Sarah had taken everything. I couldn't even be mad. I'd given her access, after all. She might have gone to Guadalajara like we talked about, or disappeared to someplace even farther away. There was only one way to find out. Back in San Francisco, I wandered around the local travel agencies until I found one offering a last-minute cancellation to Mexico City. It wasn't the cheapest trip, but I scraped together enough cash to make it happen. It was strange being in a position where I had to watch every dollar. The flight wasn't long, but it felt like a lifetime. I had work buddies on the trip, but they were all signing up for guided tours. I had other plans. The first 2 days were a bust. The market I'd chosen was massive, bigger than I'd anticipated. I hadn't thought this plan through at all. Each morning, I waited for Sarah, hoping she'd walk by or that I'd spot her in the crowd, but nothing. By the third day, I was losing hope and boredom had started to settle in. And then there she was. It's about time, Robert. Where the hell have you been? I turned around to see Sarah standing there, hands on her hips, a wide-brimmed straw hat with a red band sitting atop her head. Say something, damn it. I've been losing my mind not knowing if you were even alive. I stared at her for a moment, speechless. I walked over and kissed her for the first time. I wasn't sure why I hadn't done it before, but I was glad I did now. It felt long overdue, but the second kiss, followed by a tight hug, made up for the lost time. I lifted her off the ground, spinning her around. Sarah, I missed you so much. You'll have to tell me where you've been this past month, but I don't care about that right now. Let's head home and grab some lunch. We wandered through the market, hand in hand, and for the first time in ages, I felt a deep sense of peace. After everything that had happened, there was finally a moment where things felt right. Robert, please don't get upset, but I spent some of your money, she admitted nervously. I put most of it in the bank, but I needed a place to live, so I bought us a house. I hope that's okay. I stopped in my tracks and looked at her, surprised, but I wasn't angry. You bought a house? I asked, letting it sink in. She smiled sheepishly. Yeah, I figured since you had a good amount stashed away, it wouldn't be a problem. It's a beautiful place, Robert. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, I'm not mad. A beautiful house in a beautiful city with you? I'd say that sounds like a plan coming together. She grinned, relieved. It felt like everything was falling into place. Meanwhile, back in the States, things had changed for Karen. Her parents managed to scrape together enough for her bail and legal fees, but that didn't save her from a prison sentence. She ended up getting 5 to 8 years for conspiring to have me killed. I never did find out why she went that far, and at this point, I wasn't sure it mattered. Todd Mitchell had given Jerry a full deposition, though it turned out we didn't need it. The case was straightforward enough. Jerry also tracked down Ray Upright. He was sober but struggling. When Jerry asked how he could help, Ray said all he wanted was a hot dog pushcart. A simple request, and $2,400 later, Ray was back on his feet, pushing a cart through the streets of Reno. I managed to settle my IRS situation with a hefty payment of $44,000. Not ideal, but I wasn't about to fight them. The last I heard, Karen and her brothers were still in jail in Nevada, with no clear timeline on how long they'd stay there. Now, for the first time in a long while, I felt free. My old company had offered me my job back, and with a promotion, no less. The law wasn't chasing me anymore, and life seemed like it was on the upswing. Sarah and I had plans. As soon as her Mexican divorce was finalized, we were going to get married. The kids were excited to come down for the wedding during their spring break. And although the house in Guadalajara was stunning, we didn't plan to live there full-time. Sarah wanted to keep it as a vacation home, a place for us to retreat to when we needed a break from everything. Emily was eager for me to return to the office. She'd been offered a promotion too. It was a fresh start for both of us, a chance to rebuild things on our terms. Sarah, on the other hand, was ready to go anywhere, as long as we were together. She even joked about wanting to meet Karen someday, which I knew would be a strange encounter if it ever happened. Looking back, nothing turned out the way I'd planned. But as I stood there, hand in hand with Sarah, I realized that sometimes the unexpected is better than anything you could have imagined.